If you're a parent, teacher, or school leader, and you're sick and tired of the frustration, anger, and unfair treatment of children at high risk in our public schools, then perhaps it's time for all of us to do something about it. In this podcast, Dr. Almitra Berry brings you tips, tools, strategies, and tactics to build successful solutions while touching, moving, and inspiring all of us to transform our schools so that every child thrives. Here's your host, Dr. Berry.
Welcome back, Equity Warriors. Thanks for tuning in for this special episode. I have a guest today. His name is Mark Bobo. He is an educator, strategist, and motivational speaker. His focus is on helping leaders improve their capacity and efficacy through transformational leadership, cultural changes, and demonstrating how school administrators can lead their staff in a positive and constructive manner. He's also the principal of DREAM, and I'll let him tell you what that acronym stands for: Cultivating Spaces for Mutual Respect and Personal Growth, Enriching Contributors Across Diverse Backgrounds. Mark leads personal development around policies that promote a healthy, respectful working relationship, even when opinions differ, and to hear how to maximize opportunities to foster camaraderie and a growth mindset. It is my honor and privilege to welcome someone I am proud to call a friend and colleague, Mr. Mark Bobo. Welcome to the show, Mark.
Dr. Almitra Berry, always a pleasure to be with you. I'll try to be on my best behavior today. I won't fall into Mitra or nothing like that. So always glad to be with you, and thank you for this opportunity to have the conversation.
No problem. And best behavior is not what we look for on my show. We like a brutal and honest truth. I will try to watch my language today. How about that?
Good deal. Good deal.
Okay. So tell us a little bit about what you do. Tell us what DREAM stands for and your other work, especially about what you do in the K-12 education space.
Yeah. So DREAM is a birthing of my passion, which is leadership development. Specifically, I am totally invested in helping to create the next generation of leaders and to help shape perspective in regards to making sure that their leadership is holistic servant leadership. And so DREAM actually is an acronym made up of my family. My wife and my children represent the DREAMM. I have two children that begin with the M. So that's what DREAM is all about. But the undergirding of DREAM is to help leaders to revision and to dream again. A lot of times the leaders I deal with, I find that they have gotten stuck in how they saw things from years ago and are wondering why it's not working today. And I invite them into a space to dream again. How best can we do the work that we're doing and still be impactful? So that's my calling, my purpose, and my passion is what I'm able to do with DREAM. On a daily basis, I serve in a capacity where I work with school board members, particularly in the public education space, and to help them understand how best that their leadership and governance has a direct impact on the students. I think oftentimes school boards have been in the news lately, but normally school boards aren't a big deal. But I think with the onslaught of what today's climate has been, it's more important than ever that school board members understand their roles and responsibilities. And at the end of the day, they're making decisions that are the best for the children that they serve.
That's awesome. You know, I read an article this morning in my briefs about a school board member who was sworn in for this current term. It's probably about a week or so ago, on a stack of banned books. And
Yeah.
we are definitely living in very different times.
Right.
I met you based on my work around diversity and inclusion.
Mm-hmm.
So let's talk about DEI, which I say that's not a 4-letter word, even if you add the belonging in there, I guess. Right. I don't know, but it's not a 4-letter word. What do you see going on in schools and school systems, either in your state or nationwide, about diversity and inclusion initiatives?
Yeah, so when I look at DEI initiatives nationwide, I'm finding that we're living in a discourse of disinformation and misinformation. And what I mean by that is the misinformation, I think, is unintentional misunderstandings of what the intent of the work is. And I created that word of disinformation, where there's intentional practice to ensure that people are uninformed, misinformed. And so you're living in this culture where both of those things are happening, and they conflate each other, where now you walk into spaces and you even use D or an E or an I, and it's immediately an issue for those who
Mhm.
may be in the space, where I have had to have conversations with folks to remind them that all we're simply, when I speak of DEI, I'm speaking of how best can we make sure that every student that you serve has their opportunity to reach their God-given potential. And what my son may need may look very different than what his classmate may need. But what can we do as educators to make sure that every student is getting what they need? And some people try to take the conversation to places that are not appropriate for the conversation. There's this is not indoctrination. This is
No.
how best do we meet every student where they are, give them the
But don't you
resources they
think
need. Yeah, yeah,
you use the I word,
hmm
indoctrination?
yeah,
So do you, I'll
hmm
fully transparent, I firmly believe that there is a desire for indoctrination, that we have been indoctrinated in our public schools for decades,
hmm
century plus.
hmm
But it's been the indoctrination that was acceptable to those in power.
I see.
And so now, where we're looking to tell a true narrative,
hmm
where they don't want that true narrative told, or certain children's needs to be met so that
hmm
they can become the best version of themselves,
Yeah.
that that it almost seems like a doubling down on an indoctrination effort,
hmm
but very narrowly defined the
Certainly.
way certain people want it.
Because I would almost argue those who stand in that perspective will not admit that it's been indoctrination for years ahead of time.
Yeah.
We won't agree with that. But this, what is considered to be this new narrative, which is actually reaching back to the truth of a lot of the situations that we're trying to teach about, it makes it the boogeyman or the scary monster that's always waiting around the corner, that indoctrination is trying to happen to your children. I've had to have conversations with folks to kind of have them to step back and to say, if this is going to be a conversation of truth, or is this going to be a conversation of conjecture? And when you make that distinction, let's have the conversation about truth and how best can we back up what we're seeing, believing by factual information. That kind of tempers the roles there, and it kind of tempers the anger. And again, when you take it back to how best that student is able to reach their potential, it's not about us as the adults. And I'll even offer this. Was having a conversation with students just a few weeks ago, and we asked them different questions about what do they see in education today? What would they like to see the future of education? What is wrong with education? What is right with education?
Mhm.
I will tell you, none of the things that we as adults are arguing about came up in that conversation. Not one. Not one. These students were talking about, obviously, the advancement of technology,
Mhm.
going back to how best to treat one another. How do I navigate the process of becoming a professional after I'm leaving high school? There was no talk about banned books. There was no discussion about which bathroom to go into. Our children are not focused on what we think they are focused on.
Right.
And so when we get back to listening to our students, and which is a little bit different than a narrative we may have had before, but I really believe in that student voice and that student
Yeah.
input in regards to what they need to be successful today. The reality is, I graduated from high school well over 20 years ago. And what my son is dealing with today looks nothing like I had to deal with. And I don't know how I would navigate today's high schools, because
Yeah.
it's just a totally different time. But it still amazes me what we will spend hours and millions of dollars on in
Mhm.
regards to discussion is nowhere close to what our students are talking
Yeah. I think you said 20 years ago. I don't want to count how many years ago it was when I graduated from high school. More than 20. Um,
about.
but I think one of the things that we also miss, and absolutely, and I've said this, I think, ad nauseum, student voice and
hmm
student agency is critical.
Yeah.
It's like they're the only population of people, or a community demographic, call it whatever you want,
hmm
who receive a service but don't seem to have any say in
Yes.
how the service is received or what type of service they feel they need.
Right.
right? They're just being told this is what you get. And from a group of people who have been out of that place as a
Yes.
student for decades, most
Hmm.
often when we talk about policymakers.
Hmm.
Um,
And too often, people have continued the model from the 1950s and 60s. Very literally, we
yeah,
still in our
that factory
schools.
model.
Yeah,
Yeah,
we're still responding to bells and whistles. I mean, the students
yeah,
are allowed to move until the bell goes off, and then you have a certain time for lunch, and then the bell goes off, and that dictates how you move. And it's very much does not prepare them, in a lot of cases, for the world they're walking into. I mean,
yeah.
right now, a good majority of our a decent majority, a decent
Hmm.
population works from home, works
Yeah,
remotely, won't see their office all year, right?
yeah,
But we're still teaching students to report in at a certain time.
yeah,
You have to make this grade or this test by a certain measurement.
yeah.
Whereas the reality of our world today is very different than that. You know, I had a student talk to me the other day, and I tried to keep a straight face. They said, well, Mr. Bobo, I plan to be a YouTube influencer. That is my goal. That's what I'm focused on. All right. And I kept a straight face, Doc. I did. I
Yeah,
did. I was
yeah.
like, I was an encouraging person at that moment. Um, but then this is where they got me. I've done the data analytics behind what I want to do. I
Mhm.
have studied other influences that are in the space already. My niche is going to be a little bit different. And they explain, and I don't want to give their idea away, but they
Yeah, yeah.
explain how their niche market will be slightly different than the influences they've researched. They talked about how not only will they use the YouTube as their main platform, but there's these other platforms that are
Hmm.
more catered to where they're going. That had
Yeah.
nothing to do, respectfully, with algebra or the reading, writing,
No.
arithmetic in the manner in which we looked at it for when we were going to high school. So
Yeah.
I think all of us as adults that I believe have a sincere heart and passion for students have to understand the importance of student voice and agency in the way education is being done today.
Hey there, Equity Warriors. I want to take a quick moment to share something exciting with you. You know how passionate I am about equity in education, right? Well, I've created a special space, a safe space, where we can dive even deeper into these crucial topics. It's our Patreon channel, and I'd love for you to join me there. Here's why it's so awesome. As a Patreon subscriber, you'll get access to exclusive content that I will not share anywhere else. I'm talking additional insights, workshops like you would get in regular professional learning sessions, resources that can really amplify your impact in education. But it's more than just extra content. By subscribing, you are directly supporting our mission. You're helping to create more valuable discussions and resources that you've come to love. You're part of the change we're making in educational systems. And let me tell you, our Patreon community, it is something special. It's a place where passionate educators and advocates can come together, share ideas, and drive real change. So if you're ready to take your commitment to educational equity to the next level, I'd be thrilled to have you join me. Just head over to patreon.com/3E podcast. That's patreon.com/3E podcast. Remember, your support means the world to me, and it helps me continue this important work. Together, we can create the educational system all our students deserve. Thanks for considering, and now let's get back to the episode. Yeah. Yeah. And the other thing that we tend to not think about is the things we're trying to, not we personally, certainly not you and me, but that certain people are trying to keep children from seeing or engaging in. They already know how to get that content.
Yes. 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 It's a
If,
fact.
if they've got a phone or a computer, they've already got it. And
Yes.
kids, from a psychological sense, they're no different than we were. The one thing you went out and did was whatever mom and dad said you weren't supposed to do.
Exactly.
If you weren't
Exactly.
supposed to hang out with that person or you weren't supposed to date that boy,
Yeah.
who were you running behind? The
Right.
ones that, why not? They
Yeah.
always look like they're having fun. Mom and dad must not want me to have any fun.
Hmm.
Kids by nature are going to do what they're told not to do.
Yes. Yeah.
So maybe instead of banning those books, they ought to fill up the libraries with them. Although that might keep the kids out of the libraries completely. All that stuff for us to look at.
or have open dialogue.
Yeah.
I'm blessed to have 4 children. And there have been some tough conversations. And
Oh, yeah.
I'm not going to lie to you. After some of these conversations, I go back to my bedroom, very uncomfortable, but they had to happen, right? And I think it's a two part. We as parents, we are actually going to have to parent appropriately, which
Mhm.
means having dialogue and discussions that
Yeah.
maybe we didn't have when we were younger, or maybe we're not comfortable in the space, or getting resources for ourselves to be able to have the appropriate conversation. And then
Yeah.
two, in the schoolhouse, it's not so much banning what you may think is inappropriate, but how do you have the appropriate conversation when the access is given to them? Because it is true, you have ended the accessibility jail is open as soon as you put that phone in that child's hand,
Yeah.
and it doesn't matter what age they're in, they have access to the entirety of this world. And
Hmm.
so maybe we become better prepared as adults to have the appropriate conversation. And I want to be clear, you know, the conversations I have with my 8-year-old daughter is very different than I have with my 17-year-old high school senior, right?
Yeah.
Like there's things that she has not been exposed to, and I've been intentional about that as a parent. But I also realize the day is coming that I'll have to have different conversations, right? At the same time, with my son being, about to go to college, it's a very different exposure that he's already had that maybe I didn't have at his age, or maybe I was a little bit more sheltered about because I didn't have the access. I mean, when I was
Yeah.
coming out of school, we're still like AOL was still getting kickstarted, right? I mean, so like, going to the
AOL didn't
world,
get kickstarted until I had kids.
you
So
know,
let me,
we're talking about the dial up and hearing these weird, strange
yeah,
sounds come
yeah,
through to maybe
yeah,
connect to this thing called the World Wide Web, right? Whereas
yeah, yeah.
now, as soon as my children wake up, the world is their oyster,
Right there
literally at
on
the
their
palm of their
phone.
hands. So
Yeah.
it's a different world. But I think no longer can we use the excuses as the adults that are intending to do best by these children. We can no longer use the excuse if I just ban them away from everything. No, you're going to have to be prepared that
Hmm.
they already have it. How
Yeah.
best are you going to address it?
Yeah. Yeah. Everything my parents didn't want me to learn, I learned from somebody in the neighborhood or from an older sibling or from somebody at school. They're
Yeah.
going to find the info. And that was back when if we wanted a book, you had to go, or information, we had to go to the card catalog in the
Now you're
library.
talking. Now
And
you're talking.
there's probably a whole bunch of people listening to this saying, "What's a card catalog?" Yeah, ask your neighborhood librarian about the
That's
old card
right. That's
catalog.
right.
Yeah,
Shout out to all the
there's
librarians out there. Thank you for your
yes,
hard work and
absolutely.
dedication.
Oh yeah. Um, so all of that really is about everything that's going on in our schools. A lot of people don't realize that all of that started, and that's one of the things I've tried to call out this season on the show is educational policy and how
Yes.
that gets developed and what can we do. And I know since you work in that field,
Hmm.
I want to ask you, what do we do? How can listeners, communities, whoever these people are that are listening? I know we have parents, we have educators, we have elected officials,
Hmm.
but how do they support professional development for educators,
Hmm.
teachers, school leaders in delivering instruction that we think or what should be equitable, and
Hmm.
consider student voice in that and student agency as well, what kids feel they need,
Hmm.
what we know from the way the job market looks now and the way it is shifting and the way our economy is not local anymore, it's global.
Right.
How do we get people to develop policy to support instruction that will take our current children in school
Hmm.
into their future?
Yeah. And so there's a lot of layers to it, and I'll just try to simplify it
Yeah.
as best I can. All, at least public school districts, are regulated or mandated by the revised codes of that state. Your legislator puts things in
Yeah.
place, standards and things of that nature. And then the school district itself is responsible to interpret that legislation and to place it into appropriate policy for your particular district. So the two layers there are, you need to be conscious of who you are voting for to serve in your state legislative assembly. Um, Politics is local. I
Mhm.
need to say that many times over. Politics is local. I know everyone gets excited about presidential politics, but the reality is your day to day operation in a lot of ways is dictated by your state legislature.
Yes.
So that's the one leg. The other leg is be conscious of who serves on your school board. I always advocate for an informed voter. If the people are wanting to serve on your school board, you need to understand who they are, and what they stand for. So you are voting your conscience when you go into that booth. But when all that is said and done, you are always welcome as a parent to attend the school board meeting. Your presence and your voice is welcome there. In the state in which I serve, public comments are optional, but a good majority allow for public commentary. I'm not sure how many states operate that way, but and
Yeah.
so very, very important that when you go to the meeting, that your voice is heard in a way that can be understood and received.
Mhm.
If you wanted to share that you have a concern about the professional development that's happening for teachers in your districts, that's the time to do it. And get to know who serves on your school board. They're members of your community that you voted into that place, and they have access to help determine the policies, procedures of the district. It's very, very important that you understand how that process works and how important it is, because it does have a direct impact on what your children receive.
Yeah. I've been saying it almost every single show, towards the end of every show, about
Hmm.
getting involved and voting in those local elections. I did an episode, I don't remember what number it was, a while back, but I dug into the numbers, and it's a very ridiculously small number of people that actually vote for school board members.
Hmm.
You have in medium and large size cities, you have school board officials that are elected with maybe 400 people voting in an
Right.
election. That is a very
Hmm.
small number
Yeah.
considering the number of children's lives that are in their hands once elected. So
Hmm.
it is critically important that we do that. And, I don't know if I ever shared with you, but I was that PTA parent that was at every school board meeting,
Yes.
turned in my card at the beginning of every school board meeting.
Yes.
And there were a couple of board members who would see me and just go, oh, God, she's back. Always, I swear there was one who had a bottle of something special underneath the
Oh
dais that
my.
was taking a nip or two to get through. Always very respectful,
Yeah.
and always, me advocating for children. But and we had so many parents who were afraid to stand up and talk about the challenges that they were having. So for
Hmm.
me, I felt like my service
Yeah.
to take what those parents were having challenges with, and I'd get their information, then I'd take the hit. It was
Yes.
fine. What were they
Yes.
going to do?
And
Um,
and I would also offer, as you stood as an advocate, sometimes it becomes, oh, it's all about Amplifying Berry is coming with a concern,
yeah,
versus if the community says we're all concerned about this. And I'm not talking about protests or anything like that. I'm just saying show up for the meeting, and there's
yes,
different voices saying, hey, this
yeah,
is a concern that we have as a community. It really makes a difference, because again, at the very least, those board members have to, they'll be up for reelection again. And if
yeah,
you're not speaking to what your community needs, of course they know that risk, is always there. So I
yeah.
always encourage, parent involvement is very, very important.
Mhm.
And when I say parent, I mean the guardians. I mean whoever's responsible for the child, and the,
Caregivers.
the caregivers. Very important to have that voice there and present at those school board meetings.
Yeah. And to be clear, Mark, there were times when there was so much to be said. Certainly I couldn't do it in the 2 minutes that I had. So as a PTA, and I served at the school district level in
Hmm.
PTA. I don't know, a lot of people may not realize PTA is a very structured organization. You have your
Yes,
school
indeed.
PTA and school district PTA, state PTA. Um, so we would get together, put it all into a single document that
Hmm.
everyone had a copy of. And the first person, whoever they called on first, would start at the beginning and start reading. And when they
Yes.
said your time is up, everybody marked where that person stopped.
Picked up.
And the
Yes.
next person, yep, pick it up
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
keep on going. Drove them nuts when we did that.
Yeah.
But it was really because I was coming from a community where parents had not stood up and
Hmm.
addressed the issues and concerns of children. Anyhow,
Hmm. But no, but I,
got
but I
off
think
that.
that speaks to the power of intention, right? It's
Yeah,
not haphazard. I'm not coming in here looking to turn over
just going
tables.
off.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah. No, this is we understand what our issues are, what our concerns are. We're going to elaborate on those, make you aware of them, and then we're coming as a team to say this is not just I'll meet you. It's no, it's us as a community. We have these
yes.
concerns. I think that was wise, and I would say that that's a very good approach if you're trying to impact change and make a difference.
Oh, well, good. I
Yeah.
must have been before my time because I'm thinking my kids were, this had to be, 23, 24 years ago. It
Yeah.
was a minute ago. It was a
Yesterday,
minute
just
ago.
yesterday.
Yeah,
Uh
just yesterday. Uh-huh. I figured I was doing really well when there was a group that approached me to run for school board.
Yes. Yeah.
And I found out that it was the group that was funding pretty much everybody who was winning a school board seat. And
Mm.
that's when I really started to understand how people were getting elected to our school board, who was involved, where the money was coming from, and why we were not seeing more people that we thought were representative of the community as a whole. So just,
Yeah.
so folks know, um, the local politics is still big politics. It's still big
Pineapples.
politics. Yeah. All right. So let's talk about advocacy,
Hmm.
but from the position of superintendents and school board members. What's their
Yeah.
job? What's their role in advocating for diversity and equity?
Well, yeah. So when the roles and responsibilities are pretty, clear between the superintendent and the board of education. Board of education, again, is responsible for the governance and policy creation for a school district. That superintendent reports to the board of education, and they are responsible for implementation of said policy. And so, if a community and a board and a superintendent is really wanting to make that advocacy in place to making sure all the students are taken care of, they are empowered to do so within the guidance, obviously, of revised code. And so, what I often tell people is, superintendents most often have, curriculum directors that look at
Mhm.
curriculums and how best and what will work best for the schools that they're responsible for. Well, that curriculum correct director may look at different examples of what may work and what may not work. I think sometimes we miss out on an opportunity to maybe share information that we have with said curriculum director or superintendent
Mhm.
to say, here's some powerful information that I found. Um, Maybe worth your time to look into and investigate it and see if this may be appropriate for our district. I think, when sometimes I believe that systematic approaches to capitalize on people not being informed is really in place. Like they
Mhm.
oftentimes these systems benefit from us not being informed of how the system works. So we just kind of think we send our children and that's it. We hope for the best. Well, no, you have an opportunity to make a difference for your not only your child but for all the students that are there.
Yeah.
And I would be remiss if I didn't mention this. Um, what may be needed for your child could look very different for other students. And
Mhm.
so when you always come with the list of only what works for your child, I would caution that the board and the superintendent has to consider all students. And so, advocacy in its place is important, making sure that all students are kept in mind with that advocacy approach.
Yeah. Yeah, that's, my other life or the rest of the work that I do around curriculum and instruction,
Hmm.
and trying to make people aware, with people in schools as well as parents and caregivers,
Hmm.
that there are approaches that work for some children.
Yeah.
Not every approach necessarily will work for every child. And so that is the role of differentiation. And so to be
Hmm.
able to ask those questions about, if my child is struggling, why?
Right.
And will differentiation, is it the curriculum, is it, that they're lacking a skill, do they need additional supports,
Hmm.
what's going on, and how do we find success for not just that child but every single child through the curricula that we choose.
Hmm.
And when we find that, and this is actually something I wrote about in my first book and in the first edition, so like 2011, is that we know what works.
Hmm.
And if we take that approach, and we are not seeing that 85 at this thing I call the 85% rule. If we're
Hmm.
not seeing that 85% of our students are successful with what we've chosen,
Hmm.
without differentiation, without additional instruction, remediation, all those other things that we would have to do to bring them up, if we don't have 85% of our children on grade on time, it's not the child that needs differentiation. We as adults need to choose something that will work for that vast majority of children,
Yes.
understanding that 15% of kids are always going to need a little something extra,
Right.
maybe coming from a different community or a different school where they did not have success. And so, yes, we have to bring those up. But 85%, and I would say if I could say one thing to every superintendent and school board member in America, if 85% of your kids are doing okay, you're doing the right thing.
That's true.
But if you don't have 85% on grade on time, we need to look at why we're choosing what we're choosing, because what we're doing is not working, and there are solutions that will work for them.
And there's opportunity there, right? There's not this there's no curriculum jail, waiting for you. If it's not working, make a turn, look at something different,
no, the jail is money. That's it. They've spent money. They've spent money. They don't want to have to change again, or they were told that this would work, so they went with that. Or sometimes it's a state adoption issue, and materials depending on whether you're or not you're in an adoption state. The materials that would work for our kids aren't on the list, so we can't use them. And I call malarkey on that. You can.
Yeah, there's workarounds. And with it, legal workarounds, right? Like, and I think what we have to, I've always advocated for, how do we make it a yes? How are we going to make this work, right? And if my goal is to make sure that at least 85% are at least getting it without that additional supplemental assistance, there's got to be a way we can do it. And yes, if I spent X amount of dollars last year on this curriculum and it's not working, now granted, I'm a data guy, so 1 year of data is not enough. So I'm in full agreement with that. However, we can't go 20 years and this thing is not working. We have more than enough data to say we need a change. And I think I just challenge our listeners just to be honest about what we are seeing and the data that we're seeing, and to be honest about that, and to have the wherewithal and the gumption to say we need to do something different. I'm a big, advocate for project-based learning. I've been in enough educational spaces that it works for a vast majority of students. And project-based learning is not something that you can put in overnight. But when it's done well and with fidelity and in time, you're going to see a dramatic difference. And I'm not talking 20 years, but you're going to see a dramatic difference in the results for your students. And it aligns with what a little bit closer to what they're dealing with today. A lot of times, in the workforce that we're dealing with, it's asking you to have critical thinking. It's asking you to think beyond just respectfully putting a quick widget together. No, you have to process. You have to think through how you're going to get from point A to point B. And so I just always have challenged other educators. How do you put in systems in place with what you have to push our students to be more prepared for the world they're entering? I think that we do a disservice to our children if we're not willing to take that turn and make that change.
Yeah, because none of us, when we go to work, I shouldn't say none of us. When there is a problem at work, it's generally not, you have to figure it out, solve it, and pass this test. And if you don't get an A on this test, you're fired.
Right.
It's, what do you need? Who do you need to talk to? How can you build this group to figure out and fix this problem? We don't do things in isolation in the real world like we too often demand of our students in schools.
I agree.
That's in my book that's coming out next year.
Note to self.
Shameless self-promotion.
Yeah, it's too often, even in the work that I do dealing with leaders, a lot of the time that we spend is not necessarily in the science of leadership, but it's really getting into how do you deal with people appropriately to get them to assist you in the goal you're trying to get to. So when I deal with students, I see the same thing. They're trying to navigate relationships. They're trying to navigate people. And sometimes they're called soft skills or 21st century skills. I call them the essentials, because I don't care how intelligent you are, how skilled you are, how gifted you are. If you are incapable of working with people, you're not going to get very far. And so I think in education today, we just have to accept that it's going to be different for our children, and it's okay. It's
Yeah.
all right.
Yeah. Those soft skills, those are illegal in some states,
Oh
teaching those
my.
soft skills.
Oh my.
Yeah. Well,
Yes.
that's social emotional learning. No, we can't have any of that. I want to ask you
Mhm.
to give some advice to the folks that are listening, advocates,
Yeah.
educators, policymakers. What would you tell them to do if they had to do two or three things to create a more equitable education system? What would you say to them?
I would say one, be present. Uh, your school should know you by name because you're so present in there. And granted, I understand we all have jobs. Some of us have two and three jobs, but it's so important for that school to know you because I believe whatever child that you are sending is the best version of you. And they need to understand that my best version is here. And they have an advocate that supports the work that not only my child is doing, but I support you as a teacher because I want the best for my child. The second thing I would say is stay informed, right? There's a lot of information out there, but you want to make sure that you are getting factual information concerning education and particularly what's going on with your child beyond just the report card that you receive, every end of every quarter, end of every semester. Stay informed. And then the third thing is in the continuation of staying informed, become one that's a voice in the community on behalf of the education that your children are receiving. As I said, I'm a public education advocate. Public education saved the life of my family tree. If it wasn't for education, I know I would not be with Dr. Almitra Berry today.
And Dr.
So
Almitra Berry wouldn't be Dr. Almitra Berry without a good public education. So,
it saved my family's life, right? So
yeah, yeah.
become an advocate in the community to say whatever is happening at that school, how can we make it better? If it's not what we want it to be, how can we as a community make it better? How can we contribute? And I'll say, if you're able to volunteer in some consistent way, it makes a major difference. When parents in the building I used to administrate, when parents were present, I noticed a difference for everybody, right?
Mm-hmm.
The kids weren't as off the hook as they normally would be
Yeah.
because the parents were there. And I know my teachers would give that extra effort because parents were there. And certainly I wanted the building to be what it needed to be because parents were there. And you would say, well, shouldn't that always be the standard? Well, we're all human. Let's just be honest. We're
Mm-hmm.
all human. And so that which gets measured and looked at is what is going to be focused on. And
Mm-hmm.
so you have to be a consistent voice in that community. You have to be present in that building, and you have to be informed of what's going on in education. And I would also say assume the best intentions. Just assume the best intentions. Um,
Until they show you otherwise.
until they show you otherwise. That's how I end it. But walk in assuming the best intentions until they show you otherwise. Too often, many of our teachers and listen, I have a bias. I come from a family of educators. Both
Mm-hmm.
my parents are retired educators. My brother's an administrator. My sister-in-law is a teacher. My wife's a teacher. We are a family of educators, and I know that a good majority of educators that you come into have the best intentions. They are trying their best to do good by your child. I believe that.
Yes.
And so don't let those few cases where people have not done that, don't paint with a broad brush. These teachers are in there trying their best. They're trying their best for your students. So assume the best intentions until they
Mm-hmm.
show you otherwise.
Yes. Yes. One more question for you. My sign off, I always paraphrase Dr. Angela Davis, who said, I am no longer accepting the things I cannot change. I am changing the things I cannot accept. So I want to ask you, what is the thing that you cannot accept? And then what can listeners do to support a change there?
For me, I cannot accept children and adults not given every opportunity to reach their God given potential. I was very particular in saying children and adults. Oftentimes, and again, as an advocate in public education, we talk about the children all the time, and I think that's very important. But at the same time, you have adults in education who sincerely want to do well in what they believe is their God-given potential. There are still students today who go into college because they say, I want to be a teacher.
Yeah.
And the reason I wanted to become a teacher is because Mrs. So-and-so or Mr. So-and-so has such a great impact on me. I want to do that same thing for somebody else.
Yeah.
And I want to say that my passion is I want that student who walks into your building to have every opportunity to be successful, whatever that looks like for them, whatever supports that they need. I want that for them. But at the same time, that teacher who came in that year one, day one, full of zest, full of, we're going to do this great thing. I want them to have that same enthusiasm in year 3, year 10, year 25. And so my goal has always been, in the spaces in which I'm able to operate, I'm thinking about that student that's struggling in the classroom right now. What can I do today to help these board members or educational leaders that I interact with understand the importance of us being our best for that student that struggles? And at the same time, how can we make sure that the adults that are responsible for raising these children in these schoolhouses have all the support that they need to do the best towards the children that they are serving? So and I would say, what can a person do? A person can continue to be there for their community and for the children that they serve. Be present, be honest, be authentic, and make sure that you're doing everything you can to make sure they have the opportunity to succeed.
Awesome. Mark, ladies and gentlemen, my guest today has been Mr. Mark Bobo. I'm going to make sure his contact information and complete bio are down in the chat. So if you want to connect with him, and you just got a little slice of what all he does. And I don't want to open another can, but trust me, the man is very active and doing good things. Mark, I want to thank you for joining me. It's always fun, engaging, enlightening when I have a chance to one-on-one with you. And then Equity Warriors, remember that DEI, diversity, equity, inclusion, and even when we add on belonging, those aren't 4-letter words. Stay informed. Yes, it is a new year. Welcome to 2024, but we are still facing the same educational challenges. So as Mark said today, and I say every time, get involved, stay involved, and continue to join me every week. Connect with me on social. You know where the links are down in the notes. Send your questions, topics, requests to info@askdrberry.com, and I will answer those questions and bring you experts like Mark to help address those topics. As always, don't worry about the things you cannot change. Change the things you can no longer accept. And I'll see you next time.
That's it for today's episode of the 3E Podcast. Head over to iTunes and subscribe to the show. One lucky listener every single week that posts a review on iTunes will win a chance in a grand prize drawing to win a $25,000 value private VIP day with Dr. Berry herself. Be sure to head over to 3epodcast.com and pick up a free copy of Dr. Berry's gift. Then join us on the